Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we're really fortunate to be joined by the wonderful David Iacono, who's currently starring in the Netflix series Grand Army. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your genesis with this show, because you studied at LaGuardia, and I know that you'd actually seen some of the other students doing a performance from this. And I was interested in kind of how that led into your interest and your passion for diving into the show and becoming connected with it once it was coming together as a series.
Sure. Yeah. What an exciting first question. Okay. Yeah. So like you said, so I went to LaGuardia High School, and every semester we do like a performance of a collection of scenes. And there was this new play that like a bunch of girls were doing monologues from and scenes from, and I'd been watching the scenes. I was like, oh, wow, like this is incredibly raw and like authentic, and I'd never seen theater that I could relate to so much, and it still held such like dramatic stakes while watching it. Like it wasn't just like, here, this is a show about teens. Like it actually was still art and like true. So and a friend of mine, Amalia Yu, who's a lead in the show, she had been performing in the play when I was like a sophomore, and I never ended up going to see it, but I remember when she was performing in it. So then fast forward, like, I guess 2 years later, yeah, I was a senior in high school, or it might have been the summer leading into senior year. And I just get this audition randomly, just like from my agent. And I walk into the audition room, and I see Katie and her co-director for some of her plays, Charlotte. And I'd never met Katie before, but I'd heard of Katie a lot because a couple of my friends, including Amalia, had done classes at her school and stuff. And so eventually we realized that I go to LaGuardia and I know Amalia, and I was like, wait, is this script based on Slut the Play? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, oh shit, like no way, like that's crazy. I know this play. And so I was immediately so excited. Like I was like, please cast me. Like this theater, like this piece of work, like touched my heart years ago, and I've always thought about it, and it would be such an honor to be a part of this. And then when I booked it, to be honest, at first I was a little bit, like hesitant, or not hesitant, but just a little scared that the original material, because it was made for the stage, it wouldn't like transfer very well over to the screen. And I was just completely blown away when I read the script. I was like, wow, like this is perfect.
I was interested in the use of the original text from the play and whether that was a useful tool at all. Obviously it's a completely restructured version for the series, but was it useful at all to revisit in terms of just looking at the overall tone and atmosphere and approach to character that Katie has?
Most definitely. So like I said, it's based on Slut the Play, but there's also a lot of influences from another play Katie wrote called Now That We're Men. And when Slut the Play would go on tour, Now That We're Men was kind of like I guess you call it like its brother play that would also go on tour with it. And that play is equally as real and authentic, but it's a cast of all guys instead of all girls, like Slut is. So for me, Slut the Play was definitely helpful in preparing for the role, but Now That We're Men was actually just a little bit more, because it was just more relatable. And my character, Bo Orlov, definitely, like, there's a scene in Now That We're Men about, or I don't want to spoil too much of the show, but there's a scene in Now That We're Men that is very, very similar to a scene that Orlov has in the show. And I read that scene, and it just really kind of fueled the performance on the day. And then I actually ended up being cast in a revival of Now That We're Men, like back in February, right before COVID started. So we were able to do like one performance, and then the tour kind of got cut short. But yeah, in terms of the source material being helpful, absolutely, especially because it does transfer so well. Even though, like you said, they did have to kind of restructure for the screen, that's what like surprised me so much, is that like Katie Capiello, like I said, who's the showrunner and the writer of the plays, she was able somehow, like, she really stuck to her guns and stuck to her roots. And I was amazed by that, and that definitely made it easier to kind of sink into the character's shoes.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned like the play Now That We're Men that you were in, because I know that you've mentioned that that was a really transformative experience for you. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about like what was it so specifically about being in that production of being in that play that was really transformative or kind of like elevated your work as an actor?
Sure. Yeah. So I had never really done like the only theater I'd ever really performed was in high school or like middle school. And although LaGuardia is a pretty like well respected performing arts school, there's still something different about doing a show for school and doing a show, not for school. So when I was cast in Now That We're Men, I was so excited to actually like do theater not in school. So off the bat, I was like, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna be a changed actor after this. And then I started working it with Charlotte, who I mentioned earlier, who directed the revival of Now That We're In, and Katie
Mhm.
definitely helped as well whenever she could, but she was pretty busy with all the post production stuff for Grand Army. But just like working with them on this show, I had never really worked with an acting coach before or acting
Mhm.
teacher outside of LaGuardia. And so that was really my only experience I'd had with like really honing the craft and really getting into the nitty gritty of the actual scene work and script work and stuff like that. So for my second acting like teacher experience to be Katie Capiello and Charlotte Arnault, I was just like, they're just really, really incredible. So the things that I learned from those two were just so sick. And in terms of the actual performance, so Now That We're Men is similar to Slut the Play in that it does cover pretty typically taboo topics, um, including sexual assault and rape and things of that nature and rape culture. Um, so I'd never really been a part of something where you're encouraged to make people uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
that's just so beautiful to me that was the goal, because that really starts a conversation. And then after every performance, you do a talk back with the audience because there's a lot to unpack. And that specifically really just showed me how powerful art can be and how powerful theater and TV and film in general can be, and that it's not, because it's so easy to get caught up in like being an actor just because you've been doing it for a while or just because you like attention or you're good at it. But at the end of the day, there's such powerful and meaningful reasons that we do what we do. And that show just really reminded me and jogged my memory of why I did it in the first place.
Mhm. Did the experience of doing the talkbacks and kind of seeing how people were interpreting the text in your performances influences any of the choices that you would make as you kind of continue to evolve the character throughout the
Mm,
ongoing series of the performance?
interesting. Um, I don't know that I would say it directly influenced any
Mhm.
choices I made, because during the talkbacks, you kind of take the acting cap off and you kind of just want to listen
Mhm.
to how people receive the material. And when you would talk to them, you would also kind of want to look at it like you were an audience member, not like you were an actor in the show itself. Just because I feel like if I were to directly take in certain feedback, it would kind of just mess with the character's motivations in a certain way, and I would just probably get too much in my head about it. But I definitely did value the feedback and the shared experiences that these people would share with us as a human being, not really so much as an actor, as like just like as a person. It was just great to like hear what these people had to say.
Yeah. And your character that you're playing in the series as well, like grew up in Brooklyn in New
Mm,
York, which was also the same experience that you had, not in exactly the same neighborhood, but somewhere close.
mhm.
And so it's interesting kind of like the unique understanding that that gave you to your character and some of the details that you decided and uncovered about him as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know I grew up with kids just like Orlov, unfortunately. Just kidding. But I definitely was able to draw from the experiences that I had. I grew up in Marine Park, which is similar to where Bo is from, Brighton Beach, in the sense that it's pretty. I feel like the further away you get from Manhattan, the less politically correct or willing to be progressive some neighborhoods get. Um, not because there's like just an unwillingness to, just because it's very sheltered, and it's like everybody knows everybody, which I value and I love where I grew up, but also it's good to like break out and like go to school in Manhattan where you're experiencing a lot more diversity and different cultures and things like that. So yeah, I definitely was able to draw from experiences I've had growing up here, and without like what was so valuable about that was because I know like there were people I grew up with that were friends of mine that were similar to this character that I was playing. So when you're playing some character that's antagonistic in some form of way, you can't approach it thinking that he's evil or that he is the antagonist. So because I was friends with these kids, that really made it kind of seamless, like I said, to just like fit that role.
Yeah. I also love that a lot of the other cast also kind of like grew up and went to school in New York as well. So you all brought that really unique shared experience. And, you know, going to school in New York is obviously a different experience to, you know, going somewhere a little bit more suburban. It's like you step out of your school, you're taking the subway, like you're really still living in the city in every single moment. And I love the way that that comes across in the show, and was interested in the way that you and the rest of the cast thought about what that unique experience and perspective of being a New York student is, and how you wanted to bring that to the forefront through the show.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you picked up on that, because that was one of my favorite things about the cast, was that, I mean, not all of us are from New York, but a good amount. And yeah, I just felt like when I watched the show, New York City isn't so much of a setting, it's more of a character. Like it's a character in the way that it affects other characters in the show. Like it's like a living, breathing thing. So to get to know a fellow character because you grew up in it is just so it just makes it all worth it. Like it makes you want to be on set, and it also helps, like, just because that's where you're from, you know what I mean? So, and Katie is a proud New Yorker as well, so it's just really good New York vibes. I'm very proud of that, and I'm really glad that you picked up on that.
Yeah.
A lot of people did.
I also wanted to ask you a little bit about what your process is in terms of the way that you like to break down a script and break down a character, because I think especially for a character like this, where you're kind of interspersed with so many other characters on screen and there's so much happening in the moments between your scenes, kind of what did that look like on the back end of the work that you did with the script and with your character before you walked onto set and were working with the rest of the cast in rehearsals and in filming the scenes?
Sure. Yeah. So what really worked for me when working on Orlov was he's a very impulsive character, because he's got so much that he's like dealing with on the inside and mentally all the time. So he really does act on an impulse. So what really worked for me when I was working with the script was like tactics and actions. And what I mean by that is, like, with each line, why are you saying the line? Like, what are you trying to accomplish by saying that line? And because he's so impulsive, he doesn't really think a lot before he says something. He just acts on it. So writing out a tactic and an action kind of focused that energy as to like why I was saying something so impulsively without thinking about it. So yeah, that's something I learned at LaGuardia was action work and tactic work. And when you're doing it in school, you're like, this is kind of bullshit. Like, why do I need to do this? But then I got there, I was like, wow, this is definitely working. And it's easy to get caught up in a character like Orlov in the, like I said earlier, like the villainy of it and the evilness of it. But in the show, he has vulnerable moments, and he's an insecure guy. So if I really try to focus on like his more deep motivations and his deep character traits, that would have kind of messed me up, because he's so impulsive and he's just kind of just like diary of the mouth. This is what, and or not even diary of the mouth, just impulsive in terms of how he behaves in his actions. So actions and tactics really helped me out with all of that.
Yeah. And especially because Katie comes from a theater background, and the genesis of the scripts for this was rehearsal an important part of the process for this series, or was it completely different? Obviously, because it's television, you know, there's not always as much time as there is to rehearse in theater.
Yeah. So you kind of hit it on the head. We're always, you know, as I'm sure you know, we were always going. You know, we gotta be in makeup, we gotta check wardrobe, we gotta go to sound, we gotta eat. So there wasn't a lot of time for deep acting rehearsal. Although I'm sure Katie would have loved for there to be. It was more so about line, you know, going over your lines with someone. But I will say, whenever the cast was able to, we would like FaceTime and run lines with each other the night before, so that the day of rehearsal was more about the deep acting stuff and like the actual tactics or motivations or objectives or all that good stuff. I think the first day I was on set though, and I think it was the first day for a couple of people, Katie really wanted to kind of create that creative environment so that we would feel like it's okay to just FaceTime each other. Like, she's so good. Like, she's like a puppet master. Like, she really knows what she's doing. Like, like the first day, she went out of her way to like set a couple of minutes for everybody to come out of their trailers and like actually rehearse it with each other, and actually not just about lines, like actually about scene work and like, you know, and I'll never forget that because I was like, wow, like this is unlike any other production I've ever really worked on, because usually, you know, the director directs and the writer writes and the producer produces and the cameraman does this, like, but Katie really valued bringing the acting to the screen, and I appreciated that very much, and I won't ever forget that.
Yeah. And one of the really interesting things about a lot of scenes in this show, and particularly ones that you're in as well, is there's so many fantastic ensemble moments where the camera itself even is like moving between who's the central focus of the scene. You know, it starts on one person and then it really shifts. And there's moments where you all get the opportunity to bring your character to the forefront. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how those scenes were a little bit different and how you almost like would uniquely prepare for those specific ones, because there's moments where you're still having to bring forth all the elements of your character, even if you're not at the forefront of the scene in that particular moment, even if you're not delivering dialogue. So how does that kind of like affect the way that you step into those moments?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess that was a little bit more difficult because it's so easy when the camera's not pointed at you. That's why it's so different than theater, because when in theater, if you're on stage, you're on stage, and like somebody has their eyes on you. But for TV and film, you could just like, it's so possible that nobody's watching you, so it's just so easy to have the urge to just be like, okay, like let me take a breath, like I'm not really doing anything right now, so I can just like relax. But yeah, I guess it was a little bit more difficult to actually stay in it, but I think we all pulled it off pretty well because we were aware of the fact that like of the style of the shot and what the goal of like the transitioning from, let's say, like there's a great moment in episode 1, I think, when they're in the staircase and Joey's talking to Tim and they're playing their chess and she says, "Oh, check," and then she like bumps into Dominique behind her. She's like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then the camera just ever so slightly switches over to Dom and her friends, like, because it's all about communication, I guess, like from the director and the writer, like, because we were so aware that that would be the style of it, we just kind of had to be like, okay, like, you know, the camera's about to be on you, so be your character. Don't use this time to like fall out and then have to scramble to get back into your character, you know.
Yeah. And was this the first time that you were working on something with multiple directors? Because obviously there's a few different directors coming in and out throughout the series. And if so, kind of what was that like in terms of having to like newly navigate different directors coming in as you kind of continue developing the same character and the same piece?
Interesting. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the first time I worked with several directors, just because it was pretty much like my first recurring guest star role. But it was interesting. Like I said, it was all about communication from the directors, and the directors that we had on the set of Green Army were so communicative, and they were like so willing to get to know you before they had to get to know your character. And I guess establishing that relationship with the director just as yourself before meeting them as your character really did help, because it's like you're more willing to want, or you're more capable of taking direction from someone that you have met before you're being this different person, you know what I mean? So I guess from the director's point, they just really nailed it, like just communicating with us and just being there and open. And also Katie was there too, like all the time. So if the director was ever busy, you know, with the technicalities of the job, like the shot, like the camera angle, the cinematography of it, whatever, Katie would be there to talk to you through the acting. So because Katie was also the constant, that also helped when a new director would come on, because he did have this kind of foundation of Capiello. And then each director would but yeah, definitely the director, we had some great directors that were very communicative.
Yeah. And on the other side, television wise, you've also done some great starring roles in shows like New Amsterdam and The Good Doctor. And I was kind of really fascinated by what that looks like as an actor stepping into a show that's already in full swing. It's already got its motion. Everybody's kind of figured out how they work together, and you're kind of that final piece of the puzzle coming into it. So what are the ways in which you look for the information that you need to know when you're coming in, whether it's about how the cast like to work, how they like to set up, what the environment and what the flow is within the crew, kind of like, what are the details that are really important for you to glean, because you don't have very much time to do it either?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, you really just do get thrown right into it. You just get like face first into the abyss. You're just like, oh, this is you. You are this person. Okay. Like, I know that some cast members, Marcella, who plays Flora, and Amir, who plays Sid in Grand Army, they have a scene where they're being very intimate with each other, sexually and romantically, and that was the first scene that they shot together. I don't know. I assume that they met beforehand, but like it was definitely the first scene that they shot, and that just goes to show like they just like throw you right in because there's so many different moving parts. But on a show like New Amsterdam or The Good Doctor, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Just I guess just becoming as familiar with the material as possible. I guess that would be what I would say, because you like control what you can, and then whatever you can't control, like deal with it on the day of. You know what I mean? Because if you're trying to establish these relationships with these people that you'll be acting with on the day that you'll be acting with them, you can't be worried about what's my line and like why am I saying this and what's my character. Like that'll just completely complicate it, and you'll just get overwhelmed. And or at least in my experience, the performance won't be as cathartic or rewarding.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about your experience with LaGuardia High School, which you were mentioning before, because it's such an incredible space and environment to get to learn and study within, and even just within the people that you get to work with. Like you're talking about working on Grand Army with Amalia, having already been in the play, and what that experience is like and what that brings forth. And was really curious about, like, now that you're kind of on the other side of it, what are the things that are really kind of sticking with you in your mind that you see yourself continuing to take forward as tools into each of the projects and characters that you take on moving forward?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of like the acting work itself, what I've found recently, and it's kind of bizarre, is that the acting advice or methods that I was taught earlier on in my high school career, like talking like freshman year, like that stuff is what I've been using the most. So we were taught Meisner, like a Sandy Meisner acting method, and I guess because freshman year and sophomore year, that's when you're learning like the basics, and it's like the intro still, and it's all the basis of the Meisner method. And it was all new to me, so that stuff really sticks out in my brain, especially when I'm like working a script or like working like I recently did this I did an episode of this Netflix anthology series called Social Distance, and I was working through Zoom. We shot it from home, and I was like acting with people through Zoom, which at first I was like, this is so daunting, how am I going to do this? And then I was sitting there acting through the scene with the person through the freaking laptop screen, and I was like really just drawing or thinking back to like the earliest most basic strategies and acting methods, which was crazy to me. I was like, wow, I haven't thought about this in years, and it's coming back up now. For whatever reason, I mean, I just had a really great teacher. I had great teachers at LaGuardia. So yeah, and in terms of Grand Army, I mean, just drawing from high school, New York City public high school experiences in general, just because the show is so rooted in New York City public high school, that also really helped.
Yeah. And with acting on Zoom, kind of how did you kind of navigate and approach that as an entirely new space? Because one of the most vital things usually when you're acting is like that chemistry and that energy that you get off of your scene partners, but obviously it's completely different in a virtual space. So how did you all kind of navigate that and figure that out together?
Yeah, it was like I said, I was pretty like scared to start that project, but I keep saying this, but I guess it's just really important. Just in terms of the directing, like directors, the most proud I've ever been of any performance I've done, whether it be on stage or on screen, is when the director really just is so open with you and is so like willing to talk to you and communicate with you and willing to kind of sometimes put their relationship with you first and prioritize it, even though it sounds kind of selfish. It really does help in terms of the performance, because Angela Barnes was the director of my episode 7 of Social Distance, and when we'd be on Zoom, every so often she would just kind of mention to the actors in the Zoom, she'd be like, because we were setting up, like, we had so many different jobs on that project because nobody could be here. So we were set directors, we were lighting, gaffers, we were like all these different, the sound people. So she was like, you guys have a lot of jobs right now. If you ever need to, like, take a second and breathe and just be able to take one, like, the lighting cap off and put on the acting cap and just, like, settle into it, tell me, and we'll go into a breakout room and we can just, I'll tell everybody that I have notes for you, and you can just go into the breakout room and just, like, relax, and you don't have to say anything. Just, like, let yourself get there. So yeah, I mean, that was so helpful. Just, like, she really made, like, such a isolated feeling environment feel so welcoming and open, which helps on real set, but also really helps when you're looking at everyone literally through how I'm looking at you right now through a screen. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so excited that you've had such amazing experiences on so many of the things that you've worked on already, and can't wait to see the journey of your career continuing, and the projects that you continue to take on. And thank you so much for taking time to talk to us
Thank
all about
you.
the series and your experience with it.
Absolutely. I really appreciate what you guys do, and how you guys really value the craft and everything, because it's hard to find sometimes, especially now. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.